Why wasn't she out of the country? Everybody just assumed that she had escaped. And then I guess people's immediate reaction to the fact that she was arrested and that she had not escaped, people said, well, they were naive. She was naive. Like maybe she didn't have something went wrong with the connections or something. But I do believe that there's a possibility for something else.
If I can, let me just backtrack a second. When people assume that she just didn't have the right connections, somehow that assumes guilt, right? In other words, that you have had time to set up an underground procedure, which allows you to get away. It doesn't say that you wake up one morning and find that somebody blasted your name on the radio and said that you have been accused as being part of a plot, to murder some judge. So I think the first thing that happened is that, and I think what happened to most people, is that you would fade away to try to get yourself together, to think, what in the world is happening to me, especially in this repressive, kind of society. But secondly, having, just spoken with Angela in jail, the whole problem of once she was placed on the list, of the FBI, the 10 most wanted, considered armed and dangerous, that was J. Edgar Hoover's way of saying shoot to kill. But it was not just Angela, you got to remember. It was any black woman that they considered that they could even say looked like Angela. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it. They pulled Angela's sister off of a boat in Montreal when she was on her way to Cuba, saying that it was she. They raided several homes throughout this country, saying that they thought it was Angela who went into the house, that kind of thing. So that it was impossible for her to even come back and, say to her accusers, like she had said to, Reagan once before, my politics don't indict me, they indict you.
In my own case, the latest fact is that the Reagan, have moved for a change of venue. They want the appeal trial to be held in Alameda County. You on the Alameda County? Where they know that the courts are going to follow orders up there. And I think we have to realize, as has been the whole theme of this evening, that fascism is right around the corner. And it's up to us to stand up and openly resist. We have to do this at this point in history. Now, when I was first confronted, by the regents, when they first wrote me a letter informing me that they had some kind of archaic resolution in the standing orders barring communists from employment in the University of California, and that, they wanted to know whether or not I was a member of the Communist Party, because an FBI agent had written an article in the Daily newspaper saying that there was a member of the Communist Party who had just been hired by the philosophy department, and he or she, quote, 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 there aren't very many women in the philosophy department at UCLA. That's another thing, too. But, they expected me, I think, to, take the First Amendment, to take the Fifth Amendment, and so forth. Evidently, they wanted to use this as a method of escalating their repressive tactics. Now, I resolved then and there to stand up and say who I was, what I was going to do, not exactly how I was going to do it, but I said, yes, I'm a member of the Communist Party. I belong to, the Che Lumumba Club, which is a group of black people in Los Angeles pushing for revolutionary change, and I'm proud of it. And I said that, and I refuse to take the Fifth Amendment because I don't think that my political ideas and my political activity incriminate me. I think the only thing my political ideas do is incriminate the whole network of capitalists and politicians, the Reagans, the regents, and everybody else in this country who's against the interests of the masses of the people. That's who my political opinions incriminated. This is why, I resolved then and there that I was going to do my little bit, and it was just, very little in starting right there. Now, I think that it's, given the fact that it can be demonstrated every day that fascism is right around the corner, fascism is here, it's up to us to show the American people where things are. I think it's up to us to talk about winning over that silent majority before they're completely duped in becoming the proponents of fascism. To do this, we have to go out in the streets, and going out in the streets means organizing, means raising the level of political consciousness, and other things too. Now, there's a quote which I discovered in something by W.E.B. Du Bois, whom I think is one of the greatest men this country has ever produced, and I think that it's very relevant to what's happening now. And he said over a half-century ago that friends of the movement were telling him to agitate, telling him not to agitate, rather. They were saying that agitation is only destructive, that we need constructive work. Now, Du Bois answered them with an analogy. He said, a toothache is agitation. Is a toothache therefore good? No. Is it therefore useless? No, it is supremely useful. It is supremely useful because it warns the body of decay and death. Without it, the body would suffer unknowingly when low danger lurks. You have to find out who your three R's here and eliminate them. Thank you very much.
What I was interested in that you said was that she wanted to face her accusers. In other words, what you're saying is that whether options were open to leave the country or not, this was not an alternative that she really considered as, the kind of thing that she wanted to do.
That's my, conclusion. First of all, see, Angela has always avoided options of ducking something at all, or anything that might be construed as that, right?
Obviously.
So when the stool pigeon called her a communist at UCLA, she could have legally said,
I'm not a communist.
I'm not, no, I don't have to answer the question because it's an illegal question. But Angela's answer was, now that you've asked me the question, I know I don't have to answer it, but I'm going to tell you anyway, yes, I am a communist. So, Angela faces, problems. And then there's this, but I think that she felt it was very necessary for her to be able to articulate what brought this kind of thing about and to continue her fight to free the Soledad brothers, which was a very important thing for Angela and still is. I mean, she always talks about it.
Now, I've tried to point out the fact over and over again, as I said, that my case is rather insignificant and it only received so much attention because Ronald Reagan saw it necessary to get involved in it. And of course, in the news media, jump at anything that he has to say. He has a long tradition on television and in the movies and that type of thing. But when I say that I'm trying to put this in the context of the general repression that's taking place in this country, I'm talking about the exile of Eldridge Cleaver. I'm talking about the unwarranted imprisonment of Huey Newton, about Bobby Seale, who's been chained and gagged and sentenced to 4 years for contempt of court. This sounds like something that might have come out of slavery or out of the Spanish Inquisition. And this isn't even to mention all of the brothers and sisters who fall every day under the bullets of the fascist police forces all over this country in the ghettos and the barrios. This isn't to mention the heroic fight of the Vietnamese people who are fighting for self-determination, for freedom. And I can't in any way place my individual plight on that level. And I've continued to say, and I will continue to hold the position, that if my job at UCLA prevents me from fighting against exploitation, against oppression, against repression, then I have to say later for my job.
If you believe in something as strongly as it's very obvious that she believed in their case and in the importance of people understanding what was happening, not just to them as individuals, but to black people in prisons and people in prisons and how that was being used, I don't see what choice she had. Actually, she had no choice. I mean, there was never a choice to leave the country, really.
Right. I think she finally came to the conclusion she could beat this frame-up. And it was a frame-up, and that people would see that it was a frame-up.
Yeah,
I think she wanted to make them admit that it was a frame-up. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was why.
Mm. Could you comment upon there was a thing that her lawyers were bringing up about the evidence that the courts had, that they said that if they presented it, they had, no real grounds to, extradite her or prosecute her.
Mm-hmm. Well, the California grand jury, was called into a hurried session because the first extradition papers that Rockefeller signed, they realized that they couldn't hold up in any court because they were signed with nothing. So there was no indictment. You see, Rockefeller signed the first extradition papers with no indictment. So they really knew that could be beaten in the courts. So they had a hurried grand jury hearing, and they said that they indicted her for murder, kidnap, and conspiracy. But they sealed the proceedings of the California grand jury. So the New York attorney, Angela's attorneys, nor the judge has ever had an opportunity, or Rockefeller, to see what those proceedings were. So they are accepting the word of the California authorities that they have sufficient information. Now, a governor should only sign extradition papers when he has presented before him legal arguments enough to say that we have enough evidence to say at least this person should be tried. But how can he sign it if there has never even been one grain of evidence presented to him? That's what I would just be
signing. He could sign for anybody.
Right, right, and it sets a precedence. It sets a precedent in the country, and the precedent is that you take it's the old fugitive slave law, right? The fugitive slave law was that if you were caught as a slave in the North, that all the slave owner had to do was claim you, and you had to be sent back.
This is my property.
Right? And that was the property. And it's the same law. That's what the extradition law is based on. So you are, if you are a, radical in this country, as Angela says, a priori, you are criminal.
But, I think that tags. This country has a way of using tags to confuse issues. Names or whatever, to make people inactive, And say for instance, all the GIs, in Vietnam and other places in this country, and in the Army, who have, for one reason or another, stood up, get all these numbers and things behind their names, Now those numbers, they're not a word as such, but it's a tag, so that when they come out of the service, and start getting ready to get jobs, those tags are going to affect their lives. You know. You know, communism, that's another tag. That's a tag. You know, to confuse the issues so that to make less important what a person is saying. You know.
Yeah, there's a thing in like the American religion. There's this whole thing about. I mean,
you know, Panthers. You know, we create a whole thing around who Panthers are, so that now we see, you know, people with guns and stuff. And we don't see people talking about breakfast programs, free medical attention, you know, people controlling what happens in their communities, you see, because we're immediately turned off by the tag, you know, the name, whatever somebody wants to be called.
But doesn't the tag do something else, though? It's not just to turn away your attention. It is to allow certain things to happen to you.
Right. Right.
That blunts the edge of anybody's coming to your support.
To your defense, right.
And see, the thing that you mentioned about the Black Panther Party is very interesting. Because it is my estimate that, well, in Chicago last year we talked about, you know, if things were not stopped with the way they were treating the Black Panthers, you know, beheading, you know, and so on, that it would happen all over the country. Well, that conference was held, the first week of March. By the spring, you had Kent, you had you had Augusta, and you had Jackson. Right? And now you have Angela. You know, it's a whole string of repressive measures that can be taken against anybody who dares to stand up and disagree in any kind of, with an alternate solution to problems.
You know, I think it's very important, maybe for you to just, for the benefit of the people out there, because I know that one of the main reasons that there has not been a greater movement developed in the support of Angela Davis is because of that word. And that I know how I personally react to the word subconsciously, just communist. You know, and I think that everybody in this country who was, no matter how old, during the whole 50s, was affected by the whole McCarthy period. You understand? I mean, I know that that's true. That whether they were, you know, little people or half big people or however, you know, they were in some way affected, you know, exposed to those television things and all that kind of stuff. You know, people, the whole blacklisting, the whole scare. And the country has never overcome it. You know, that was the reason there were no youth movements during that whole, of any significance during that whole period of the 50s. You know, and as people come out of that, you know, the 60s, 10 years have gone since the 50s, you know, 11 now, but still, it's still there. And see, as soon as people say communist, then everybody kind of, you know, gasps for breath,
it's the same with
steps backwards,
Heavens.
and you know, you do your little thing inside of yourself.
Well, if you think that when people look at blacks and say that they must have a tail, a black red has to have horns and a tail.
Right.
You
know.
The liberal can say, at least I'm not a communist.
Right.
You know, it's that whole thing.
Right. See, and
whereas
so
communism
people really,
may be where it's at.
You know, so like people really don't, you know, like, I mean, people just don't like kind of turn away because they feel they really should involve themselves. But if they involve themselves, then somebody will say that they're a communist.
Yeah, well, it's a commitment too.
People will say that you're a communist. And if people say that, then, that means your job or whatever.
It's gone.
You see?
Yeah. And the thing about it, especially especially like in debates and things like that, like they'll label you that so as to get by, not talking about the issues, they'll attack you personally,
Right.
and then, like you'll get defensive.
And see, one of the great things about being a communist is that, you answer that on the face of it, you make no apologies for it, you see. So
Yeah.
I have no difficulty with that. Whereas there are a whole number of people, and to get really to what you just asked, about some of the support and some of the lack of support, for Angela. Within the black movement, for example, there are a whole number of people who have determined that they will support Angela. But they must make it known that they're not supporting her politics. Well, one of the things that I've said is, that the major thing is to free Angela. And in the marketplace of ideas, you will decide whether some other philosophy wins or whether Angela's philosophy wins, But if you're really talking about freeing her, you've got to free her recognizing that she is a communist. Because for her to cop out now on her political philosophy is to kill a certain part of Angela. And while you may be freeing her in terms of the sense of her body, that what makes her live and breathe and her own philosophy, if you kill that, her ability and her right to do that, to have that as her opinion, then you kill a certain amount of her. And that people have to accept and understand.
We need to close ranks, just like Agnew wants his boys to do.
Right. See, Agnew doesn't care whether Rockefeller comes on sometimes like a liberal or not. As long as when it came time that when they didn't want Goodell anymore, that Rockefeller pulled off his support of Goodell. That's what Agnew was concerned about. And Nixon might say, well, now Agnew shouldn't say these things the way he does. But Nixon said the same thing when he was vice president for Eisenhower. So it just depends who's the top man at the given moment. So they do close ranks,
Yeah, even lately, Nixon came out in support of Agnew there, about the campuses and things like that, him making statements. Just, said, that's, like the division between the college administrators and, like the whole thing, and then just absolved Agnew of all wrongs.
See, I don't think it's just a question either of the black movement. See, because I think with the white radicals or would-be radicals or liberals, there's also this thing. Well, if it were just even if she were just a Black Panther, it would be all right because after all that's an acceptable thing because that's blackness, right? But this problem of her being affiliated with the Communist Party, that's a difficult thing because we really can't support that. Now, in their own way, that's a racist concept because what they're saying is they have to determine the politics of black people.
That's right.
Right? And black people have to determine their own politics.
Right.
Nobody can dictate that.
Right.
And, if Angela wants to be a communist, that is her decision.